In Bloemfontein is sitting for two cases of public interest. Well, the first is the ruling on the appeal relating to the Jason Rhode murder sentence. Rohde appeared in a High Court decision not to release him on bail while he awaits to appeal his murder sentence and conviction. Another case is the Michael Komape case brought about by Section 27. 5-year-old Michael Komape fell in a pit toilet and drowned at the Mahlodumela Primary School in Limpopo. For more, we're now joined by our reporter, Palesa Moete. A very good morning to you, Palesa. What are we expecting that in this morning?
Well, today should actually be quite an interesting day. We know that Jason Rhode was sentenced to 18 years for the murder of his wife. Within that trial, there was an issue of a suicide, but that obviously was overturned by the lower court, and that's why he was eventually sentenced to 18 years. He'll be coming here today. Obviously, his lawyers will be here to appeal that sentence and conviction. And their position still stands at, the suicide story. And also now on our second story, where 5-year-old Komape tragically died in a pit toilet in Limpopo. His family tried to claim for damages from the High Court in that province, but that attempt failed. So they're bringing it here to the Supreme Court of Appeal. Previously, when we spoke to a legal analyst, Mokhele, he believed that the Supreme Court of Appeal might have a different ruling on this particular matter, with all the other matters that they would take into consideration. The Department of Education back in Limpopo had felt at the time that they were not really liable for what had happened to Komape.
With regards to this being a public interest case, what sort of support are we going to be seeing outside the courts this morning?
We're not expecting much support outside the court. With the rulings here at the Supreme Court of Appeal, it's normally very brief. Usually it's a back-to-back, type of situation where the judge would come in, one judge would come in, sit down, and then literally read all the judgments back-to-back. We're not even expecting these judgments together to take more than 5 minutes. So that's why even outside, we're not expecting anybody. There's currently nobody. The judgments will be delivered at around 11:30, but we will not be expecting anybody to be here. It would be a nice surprise if there is any kind of support, that would arise later on.
Well, lastly, just in terms of the Section 27 bringing up the case relating to Michael Komape, what sort of case are they bringing forward? And have you been able to speak to Section 27 just to hear, their outcomes or potentially what they would like the outcomes to be from this morning's judgments being handed down?
Well, Section 27 would like to see Komape's parents receiving some kind of comfort from the department. But just quickly, joining us right now is our legal expert who's just arrived, Mokhele. Mokhele, thank you very much for coming to us on such short notice. But let's go to the Komape matter, for instance. You've said previously that you think the Supreme Court of Appeal might actually have a different type of ruling from what the earlier court had ruled.
Definitely, because what we should be mindful of, ma'am, is that the Limpopo High Court, when they passed judgment, there were certain remarks that the judge made in terms of the negligence, which was then cited from the side of the Department of Education. And by so doing, it clearly shows that there's a certain element that says that indeed the Supreme Court of Appeal has a leeway to tamper with the judgment which has been passed by the Supreme Court, by the Limpopo High Court. Though in terms of legally speaking, the Supreme Court of Appeal cannot tamper with the judgment only in certain circumstances. And now taking into account what has been done with this case, we should also be mindful of the fact that at the time the learner or rather the incident took place, the learner was at school and he was under the care and custody of the teachers, who also had a duty to see to it that the safety of the said learner is then guaranteed. But in terms of how they conducted themselves and how the also incident took place, it clearly leaves much to be desired. Again, we also need to be mindful of the fact that even at the time that the matter was before the Supreme Court of Appeal, and there was also certain judge comments which Judge Nafsa said against the conduct of the Department of Education. And again, he also took certain exceptions towards the advocate which was representing the department at the time, and which again the council said that this is just an ordinary matter, and from where I'm standing, this cannot be treated like any ordinary matter, wherein the learner is very young, and again the teachers had an obligation to see to it that the safety of the said learner is then guaranteed. So in all probabilities, I foresee that indeed the Supreme Court of Appeal will definitely tamper with the judgment, and they will also give a different judgment from what the Limpopo High Court has ruled in this matter. And again, also taking into account the quantum which was then awarded by the Limpopo High Court, I feel it's a very minimal amount, because now a life has been lost, a very young life has been lost. And again, in terms of the quantum, we also need to look at the fact that at the time this learner reaches the age of majority, there must always be that possibility that this person can be a prominent person in the society. And if the Limpopo High Court failed to rather overlooked that point, then again I don't foresee that the Supreme Court of Appeal can then confirm that the judgment which has been passed by the Limpopo by the Limpopo High Court. There's also reports which were also passed by the actuaries in this matter during the time the matter was initiated in the Limpopo High Court. And again, those reports were also overlooked by the judge from the Limpopo High Court. And those are the most important things which the Limpopo High Court should have then considered, and also should have then aligned their judgment in. But the fact that they overlooked that, I foresee that the Supreme Court of Appeal will definitely give a different judgment in this matter.
If this judgment favors the Komape family, what do you think it will mean now for the Department of Education, besides obviously maybe having to award something better to the family? But what would it mean going forward in terms of how they've been running their business as the Department of Education?
My sister, we must also remember that even in the judgment in the Limpopo High Court, the judge gave them time frames within which they must do away with the pit toilets. That on its own, again, it clearly shows that the judge also had a great exceptions from how the Limpopo Department of Education has been conducting their business. And indeed, there's again the Supreme Court of Appeal. On that note, they will definitely confirm that the pit toilets, as far as learners are concerned, and also more especially in schools, they will definitely have to be done away with. And again, we also need to be mindful of the fact that at the time this method, or rather the incident took place, that was the time that the Limpopo High Court was hit heavily with lawsuits relating to the pit toilets. So in that regard, I foresee that the Supreme Court of Appeal will then confirm the judgment to say that the Limpopo High Court would still have to confirm, and they would also have to comply with the timeframes which was given by the judge in the Limpopo High Court to say that the pit toilets will definitely have to be done away with, and normal toilets would have to be erected, so as to ensure the safety and security of the learners, because most of the time they would also have to go to the toilets at the time that the class are still in possession, and they would also not be accompanied by any teacher or by any adult to ensure their safety at the time they would be utilizing the said toilets. So in all probabilities, again, I foresee that the Supreme Court of Appeal will then say that the pit toilets will definitely have to be done away with in terms of the order or the ruling which was handed down by the Limpopo High Court. And the time frames, if then they have not complied with the time frames which was given in that order, then that time frames would have to be strictly complied with. And again, in relation to the award will in all probabilities be increased, because in the event the Supreme Court of Appeal overturns that, they would say that the amount or the quantum which was awarded by the Limpopo High Court will have to be increased, and that increment in terms of the quantum will again be determined by the Supreme Court of Appeal as it sees fit.
Would a judgment like that have an impact nationally? Surely it would have an impact nationally, for all of the departments of education across the country.
It will definitely have an impact nationally, and again it will also set a precedent again, because if we remember the legal representative which was representing Mr. Komape in that said that the court needs to set a precedent, and said that the court needs to rather invent the new law, which is the duty of the court to say that even though there would be similar cases, but this one is an extraordinary case, and that case would have to be treated differently. And this is an opportunity again for the court to say that they will then be inverting the law, and they would also substantiating of what has been is already happening. And then nationally it will definitely have a greater impact, and in terms of the advancement and the improvement of what the judicial system is operating on, it will definitely have a greater impact on it.
And then lastly, on the appeal for the 18-year conviction and sentence of Jason Rhodes for the murder of his wife, do you believe that he's got a chance of succeeding in this appeal?
Again, I don't foresee the Supreme Court of Appeal will give a different judgment from what has been done, because what the Supreme Court of Appeal is, its role would only be to see to it if the court acquire or the court of first instance applied the law diligently and also considered all the relevant circumstances and the evidence and testimony which was led by the witnesses in that. And should they find that the evidence and the testimony was corroborating each other, and it was also consistent with the ruling which was handed down by the court of first instance, I don't foresee the Supreme Court of Appeal giving a different judgment from what was then granted by the court of first instance.
Thank you very much. That is Leboha Makhele, who is a legal analyst here at the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein, just going through the judgments that we will be expecting today, hoping for a positive response for Komape, 5-year-old Komape, who tragically died in a pit toilet back in Limpopo, and not having many expectations around the Jason Rhode appeal for the murder of his wife. With that, it's back to you in studio.
Thank you very much, reporter Palesa Mawete for SABC News, just taking us through those Supreme Court of Appeal judgments that will be handed down today, in specific noting to public interest. And some other